All right. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We have a guest today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce him. You're going to probably realize pretty quick that this is pretty informal, even though we're going to be talking about some real stuff, because I have my brother with me today. And so we grew up together. We know each other well. It'll probably come through. But as always, we appreciate that you're joining us. And hopefully today you'll get some pretty neat information. I'm going to go ahead and give a little rundown on what he does or has done that I know. He can clear up any gaps that he thinks are significant. The main reason that he's here today, I'll start with that, and then I'll work into some other stuff. He just finished up his dissertation, and I know some of you listeners out there, you participated by helping him collect data and getting him good, accurate data. And so if you're one of those, thank you so much for doing that. We appreciate it. And as he's completed his dissertation, I thought it would be really cool to have him in here to talk about it. And so let's give you a little bit of background. When we grew up together, so his history is very similar to mine until about 18. And then he went into the Marine Corps a little before I did. And he spent a lot more time in the Marine Corps than I did. He also went to the Naval Academy. He has two bachelors? Is that right?
Well, it's a bachelor's in physics, essentially, but we all get engineering too. So yeah.
Okay. So there you go. And then he got his master's degree, and then he is now about to wrap up his PhD. So he's educated. He's got a lot of background there, but as important, maybe even more important, as my grandfather would say, he's got a lot of experience. He was, doing in the military. He did aviation ordnance, and so that's pretty interesting. Not too many people do that. He also was an MP after he finished the Naval Academy, and he ran a couple of businesses. He's now doing some, while he's finishing up his PhD, he's been teaching a lot. So he can go into details that he wants to go into, but that's a little bit of background that gets you up to where he is right now. Do you have anything that you want to add to that?
Just one slight correction. It's a doctorate, but it's an EDD. So it's on the same plane. It's just tangent is all. So
he's got
same
an educational doctorate.
Correct. Yeah. So there's doctorates of medicine and doctorates of lawyer and a JD, and then this one's just education. So it's the same thing. It's just in a different flavor. Yep.
Cool. And today's topic, we're really going to address some of the content of the dissertation. And so really we want to focus on that today, and hopefully he'll come back, and we've been talking a little bit about starting something together. So there's the possibility that you'll get a little taste of us working together as we move forward as well. So without any more delays, let's jump into it. You finished up, well, let's just talk about the process of doing a dissertation, because we got a good chunk of the audience who've not achieved the academic level of a doctorate in anything. What in the world is that process like for those who don't know?
So it's a combination of coursework and then independent research and then independent data gathering. And there's two forms you can go through, which is qualitative analysis or quantitative analysis. In the world of education, the vast majority of the research is in qualitative analysis, but I went a different route and went quantitative. I have more of a math mind, and the mathematical process made more sense to me. So that's that. The coursework, it's around 40 credits roughly if you have a master's degree. And in my particular situation, it took about 2.5 years to complete. And the dissertation itself, probably about 1.5 years of that spent on research, writing up the individual chapters, and then getting the the proper approvals to conduct the research. There's a lot of steps you have to go through through an IRB, internal review board. So you have to justify what it is to make sure you're not doing any harm in the collection of data and all that stuff. And then once you get that approved, you collect the data and basically it's home free from there. You just have to analyze it, and that's pretty fun.
Awesome. And they've accepted your dissertation and it's been approved. You are just now waiting for the actual diploma to come through.
That's it. Yep. All done. So that's
Awesome.
pretty nice. Yeah.
That's super cool. It's like, I don't know. I think about the idea of earning a doctorate in anything. And part of it's appealing and part of it's like, I mean, really, do I need to do that for any reason? I do a lot of reading and research on my own, but I got to tell you, it's really, I don't know, from a distance and knowing how much I know you and I've been part of your life, it's really cool that you've done it. I'm like super proud to have a brother that did it. I just don't know if I'll ever be that brother who did it. So
you never know. It's weird. It kind of goes back to why I joined the Corps in a sense. Like, or no, let me back up. Why I picked the Marines over the others, let's say. Because I was told that the Marines sucked the most. Like, it was the hardest, it was the worst.
Yeah.
Initial training. And so I guess from that point on, I just decided, hey, what's the worst possible path to go down? And then I've just been picking that ever since. So why not?
That sounds like it sounds like you like torture or something.
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. Yeah, the pain is good. I enjoy the pain and getting through it. It's not always enjoyable, but it's the other side is where you feel that benefit.
No, I talk about it on this podcast all the time, actually. You know, if without discomfort, there's no incentive to grow.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So, all right, well, let's get into it. Look, we're dealing with material you know way better than me because you've spent the last couple of years looking at it and figuring it out and getting your words as right as you could at this particular juncture in your life. And so I'm probably going to sound a little less intelligent about what you wrote, but hopefully we'll be able to contribute. And more importantly, what I honestly care about the most is this podcast is designed to create perspective and to help people learn and grow on their own. And so I'm going to venture down some paths here. We'll see what happens. I'm going to start with you. Early in the dissertation, you defined accountability, and you defined it. Let's see. My note here says the definition of accountability is not universally accepted. And I stopped right there when I was reading it, and I'm going, yeah, that's a problem. But then I also started thinking, I mean, I've been kind of slow about reading this because it's, when I read things that are really, I call them thick or heavy. I have to reread parts over and over. I'm like, okay, hold on. What does that mean again? Look it up. What does that mean again? Look it up. I do that when I read somebody like C.S. Lewis. There's a few authors that are like that for me. And, dissertations or writing for journals are typically like that. They're just thick or heavy. And I started going, well, yeah, but then how do you solve that problem? There can't be a universally accepted definition of accountability because there's so many variables to it. So then I read on, which can cause confusion within the director, provider, and observer relationship. And that's where I paused and I went, holy smokes, that's a problem. And so I would love if you could just spend a minute or so teasing that apart, like helping us understand the director, the provider, and the observer, and why those three variables are so hard to get on a single page.
Yes, I mean, that's a whole dissertation in itself, honestly. But I guess the crux of it would be, so the director is sort of like the enforcer in the relationship. The provider is the one kind of doing the work, and the observer is some third party that can see both pieces. And so that's kind of the simple version of that. And then the reason that accountability within that dynamic is so important is that the perspectives of each of them is different. And then you combine that with the world view of each of those, and you have an exponential, I guess, growth in how accountability can be, I guess, defined or assumed. Does that make sense?
It does. I've actually been putting together, it's kind of funny that you went there because I honestly did not anticipate this next part, but I have been putting together a podcast I haven't put out yet on the ripple effect. And what you're describing right now is exactly that. It's the idea that once you pick a group, say the director group, the ripple effect is there's millions of data points behind that. And some of those are going to overlap with the provider or the observer, and some of them will have nothing to do. They're independent of them. And that ripple effect of it. And then you add to that one more component, which is over time, which is a lot of what you hit in your dissertation is you talk about, collecting over time to come up with, like, I'm using my language, not yours, but norms, right? Norms within the training model, norms within the behavior model.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting that it overlaps. So let's do this. I'm curious. I don't know if this will work, but we're gonna give it a shot. There has been several police killings or by accident or on purpose. We like that'll be weighed out in the judicial system. But in the month of January, we've got, like Keenan Anderson, Tyree Nichols, Jackson Lieber, Billy Couch, Christopher Mercurio. And these are all different. They are all different scenarios. And if you know about any of them, most people right now know about the Tyree Nichols one. But these all happened in January, and there's been a few more. And by the way, for the audience, police accidentally do kill people sometimes. It's, and sometimes there's, behaviors that lead up to it that are problematic. And sometimes it's just the nature of being called to extreme incidents and things happen and it's a problem, right? Like, I believe, I don't know if one of these, I was reading one, somebody got hit by a cop who was flying down the road, and they were crossing the street, had their sirens going and everything, and they didn't hear the cop, see the cop. The cop was reporting to an emergency, no intent, right? But it happens and it gets statistically added to the data. So going back to these incidents, how would we, say like the director, and we're doing a hypothetical, so we don't have to get it perfect. That's not our intent. It's educational here. It's try to help people understand. How would a director look at one of those incidents? Are you familiar with any of them?
I am familiar with several of them. Yes.
Okay. So how would a director look at an incident where a person dies?
So typically, in situations like this, it's after the fact. So it's an action consequence type of accountability where, let's say, some high level executive within, let's say, law enforcement or within government will want to hold account the actions that was observed. So it's in time, right? So it's the incident occurred, and then let's say, do we hold someone responsible, and then who is that individual? So accountability with regards to responsibility for an action. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying it's past tense, like there's
correct. 100% past tense. Yes.
And that leads back to in your dissertation, you talk a lot about the independence of a provider. Like they have autonomy in the moment, and they have to, because they're being called to unique situations. So is that Okay. So then let's use that bridge and go into what the provider would say about one of these incidents.
They're in the moment. They're in that world. And so it exists in real time for them, which is part of the title of the dissertation, right? In real time. And so they're accountable for their actions in that moment. And so I didn't quite get into this within the dissertation, but they project forward. And so what are they capable of doing, and what are they good at? And then there's in the moment, and then there's after the fact, what did I just do, kind of a thing, right? So they exist within that time frame, all three almost simultaneously, right? Yeah. And so for them, their limited window within that moment is where they're really holding themselves accountable. What am I doing? Not what did I do or what am I going to do? It's what am I doing? And how well can they do that? How well can they exist in that moment? And that's a tough place within a life or death situation, which is what first responders often find themselves in, right? So there's a lot of professions that exist within critical decision making, but not all of them are life and death, let's say, for themselves or others. And so you're looking at military, first responders, and maybe a handful of other moments, let's say a deep sea fishermen, out there where they're captains of boats, and if they turn wrong, people die, right? I mean, you can find some, but we know of first responders and military is always existing in that world.
Yeah. So the provider has to look at like what they're capable of. So they're leaning on their history. Mm-hmm. They have to make critical decisions in the moment. And then after the fact, they debrief and try to figure out where they got it right and where they got it wrong, so that in the future they have this to lean on.
Yes. And it's fast. It happens fast. All of that, even the analysis happens fast.
Mm-hmm. And so in your dissertation, you make a pretty strong case for the importance of training, but let's be real. I mean, this is, how do you train for the impossible, essentially? Because each situation is going to be unique. You come onto a scene and there's 4 people involved, and one of them has mental health, but you have no idea what they're dealing with, but you could tell they've got some mental health stuff going on. 2 of them are under the influence of something, and you can tell, but you don't know what it is or how it's going to make them behave. And then, one person's on the phone and the others are all mad at them because they made the call and you're there now. And, as a provider, right? And the provider shows up. Like, how in the world do you even venture down the path of trying to train for this junk?
Yes. If I had the answer to that question, I would have much more than a dissertation. So I guess that's where I would start. But I guess the easy answer for me to say is, so I'll just restate the question. How do you train for seemingly the impossible? And the answer is always. And in you military people and you first responders out there, you'll know what I'm talking about, because you have to constantly be thinking about it, constantly be rehearsing it mentally, and then you have to actively train as much as you can, because in order to build that repertoire of knowledge that you need to lean on, you have to experience it over and over and over again. You don't get good at breaking down a weapon without doing that over and over again. You don't get good at handling DUI cases or domestic violence cases without experiencing it over and over again. So the more you can train in that, in the hypothetical and in the real, the better you'll get at it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me a little bit, yes. But I've got some frame of reference to lean on.
Sure.
And much of our audience doesn't. So how do we get to the point where an observer, somebody who is outside of the director and the provider, understands the complexities. Because see, like a director, we would hope at least, is somebody who came up within the system and understands the role and responsibilities of the provider. That's what we would hope. That unfortunately, that's not always the case, which is kind of odd to me. That being said, the one who doesn't understand it the most is probably the observer, I would presume.
Mhm.
And yet that's the one who wants accountability the most in a situation where something goes wrong. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm not picking a side here on this. I'm just trying to say, how do we get observers to genuinely understand the complexity that a provider is in and be more reasonable in their accountability? Is that even possible?
No, and it shouldn't be, honestly. They they are a crucial aspect within the accountability system because they're the ones that are living in the world that the director and provider are supposed to be providing that service to. Does that so they're crucial because they're the outside accountability mechanism that should drive what kind of training or what kind of development that the responders gain. And that's what I'm hoping within this dissertation to sort of promote. And that is, it's hard to understand what these individuals go through because you don't exist in this world every day, but you see things and you should call them out when they are a problem, but you should also call out the good things that you see because it affects what I call the self-efficacy, which is it's a well-known academic term for, what it is that you believe you can do. And if all you hear as a first responder is the negative, then it makes it really tough to lean on those experiences that are good, that drive better behavior. And so they're essential in both. Call out the negative, absolutely. As first responders, we want to be better. There isn't a first responder out there that doesn't want to be better at their job. Just like an athlete, call out the negatives. Your foot placement was wrong. It was a bad shot, whatever. Call it out. They want to know because they want to get better. And first responders live in that same world. But we also want to know, hey, when have we done it right? And it drives both things at the same time.
Yeah. No, that absolutely, like that was a perfect segue. I couldn't have done it any better because one of the questions that came up for me when I was looking at accountability through the lens of your dissertation, you talked about reward and sanction. And in that dynamic, that means inherently within accountability, there has to be both. And unfortunately, sometimes we highlight mishaps more. And they're in the mental health world, we know that this is actually relatively ordinary. We do this as a human process. We look at the flaws more often than the successes. But intentionally creating some balance to that equation, you're saying would be super helpful. And the observers are the ones who can do that. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yes.
that's their role. All right.
It really is. Yeah, because they don't exist in that world. So it has to come from a place of what did I see? And maybe also ask the question, is that right? Is what I saw right? Am I stating what I'm observing, and is that correct? Yeah.
So, if I'm an observer, then I'm putting myself in the observer position. It might be something where it would be really, really good for me to let my media know that I want some of the good news. Like find that officer, that EMT who showed up and saved a life. Right?
Yeah,
So
for sure.
It looks like we got some company back there.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. We
So,
can
well,
maybe.
don't worry about it. I can only see a blur. I have no idea what that is. I mean,
Okay.
I do, but the
Yeah.
audience will have no idea.
Okay.
And so the sidebar for a second. My brother also has a family. He's got 3 kids and a wife, and we just saw the blur of one of them.
Yeah. All good. All good.
So, okay. So if we're typically highlighting mishaps, we really want observers to step up, not just highlight mishaps, but highlight the good stuff. And really the best way an observer, I think, potentially could do this, and you tell me if you have a better idea, is really push the media to give us some of the good news. Like really get that done. I think of an example. A few years back here in my area, we had a situation, a really unfortunate situation. I live near lakes and rivers and stuff, and just south of where I live, there's a relatively large lake, and a baby was lost in the lake, and there was posted an image as the law enforcement pulled the baby out of the water, already deceased. There was an image of the law enforcement person kneeling and just crying over the baby. And to me, that is something that stuff doesn't make it into the media very much. And there's a reason why. Like a lot of people don't want to see death. And I get that. But the beauty of watching a person love another person so much that they never even got to meet, that it took them to their knees and brought tears. Like our law enforcement, our EMTs, unfortunately, they do that routinely. They're in that regularly. And honestly, I would love to see that kind of compassion out there a little bit more as an observer. And we just don't. So do you see it differently, or do you see it similarly?
Yeah, it's hard because most of the people we would interact with, and I was former law enforcement. I don't know, did you talk about that at the very beginning?
I told everybody you're an MP in
Oh
the
yeah.
area.
Okay. So yeah, the people we interact with, generally speaking, we don't know, but we want the best for them. We want the outcome to be positive, because we often don't see them on their best days, I guess is the nice way to put it. Something is wrong. So some vehicle incident, or I mean, I could just list a whole bunch, but they're not good days. If we're there, it's not good. And so we want to try to make the situation better, which was kind of our motto, make it better. We can't make it fair. We can't make it right. We can't make it, perfect, but we can make it better. We can leave it better. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, working with families, kids, it's really sad. Like it can get really sad, and we're personally attached to those moments, and we don't want to cause pain in any way. So we're not there responding, trying to be like, okay, how can we make this like really tough thing, look awesome. That's not if it's boring, it's perfect. Right? If we never have to take out a weapon, if we never have to do anything physical, it's perfect. That's what we want for them and for us. And so, I mean, maybe I got lost on the point on that one.
No, you're good. I mean, you're basically saying the same thing, which is, you want it to be better, and that's, the idea of showing up in the chaos is something that you moment to moment are looking for a way to make it better than it was a moment ago.
Mhm.
It actually leads me to something that I just had this conversation with my daughter. It was so frustrating. Okay, so I'm riding along, sitting in the passenger seat. My daughter's driving. She's young. She's 16, and I routinely ride with her. It gives me good, daddy-daughter time. She doesn't know that I do that for that reason, but she thinks I just need a ride every time. Sometimes I'm just wanting to be there. And at the end, what happens is I'm sitting there and the alarm comes on for a police officer. All right, the sirens, we hear it. I see the lights, and I tell my daughter, after I realize she's going, I'm like, hold on, you see the sirens, you hear the sirens, like, pull over. And she says something kind of naive, which is, 16, you got a little grace. That's why I was there, I guess. And she goes, oh, I thought that was just for the ambulance. I'm like, oh, what? Are you kidding me? Did you pass the drive? I didn't say that. But in my mind, I'm thinking that. And I said, my response to her was, no, somebody's having a really bad day and somebody's trying to go help them. You get out of the way. You let them get to somebody who's got a much worse day than us. And if it means we're a little bit late, if we're not having the day that they're having.
Mhm.
So get out of the way, let them go by, and then carry on with your business. And she didn't really respond, which in a 16-year-old world means I heard you. But it's
Yeah.
the idea of what you're saying is, you've got to show up. You got to do the best that you can. And as an observer, which is what we were in that scenario, we're watching the incident. We didn't get to see the actual incident, but we got to see a narrow portion of it.
Mhm.
We had a role to play besides just observing. And sometimes that happens. So,
Yeah, actually, that's kind of interesting that you said that, because as law enforcement, fire, and EMTs, when we arrive on a scene, that is our role at first. We are the observer. There's already a director-provider relationship occurring within that moment if it's a conflict. And then we have to insert ourselves as a new provider, which is a really interesting dynamic, because we have to observe it first. So we're back here, we see what's going on, then we insert ourselves, and now we become a provider, and we try to change that dynamic and put it on us so we can take the heat within that moment to try to lower the temperature within that environment. Does that make sense?
yeah,
So
you're talking about de-escalation. We do that in family work all the time.
yeah.
And that comes back to something that I have hit in my podcast over and over with communication.
Mhm.
And that means what you're saying is the provider has to be a professional communicator.
Oh, words. Yeah. 100. Yes.
But okay, so let me ask this, because I honestly don't know. I didn't go through the law enforcement path. What okay, so communication is not just words. Words are important,
Mhm.
but communication is going to be body language, positioning,
Mhm.
and it's going to be paraverbals, tone, volume, cadence.
Mhm.
How, I mean, this is anecdotal. So like, like we're not looking at facts here. I mean, maybe you have some, maybe you don't, but how well do we train communication within law enforcement in terms of the big three, the words, the paraverbals, and the body language?
That can vary from department to department. I think baseline training could be a whole lot better within that realm. We're very good tactically, and by tactically I mean use of tools. So within the physical realm, but when it comes to the non-action, I guess you could call it, it could be better, I think.
Mhm.
And I would probably have to do further study in that to see how that varies from department to department. I know in Oceanside, California, which is a former place that I lived, the cadence and the tone was really important. They were really good at it. And that was really cool to see, because it started from the dispatchers through the radio and then on scene. Like they were very well trained on that. And then in another city I worked with, they also were very good with their nonverbal and their positioning, which that was actually really neat. Like they're super professional, and they would come up and they would make sure that if you take, let's say, so here's a hypothetical. Let's say you respond to a domestic, right? And let's say in this situation, let's say it's a man and a woman, and they're outside the home. So you don't have to make entry or knock on the door, which is very dangerous to do. But let's just say they're already outside and the conflict is out there. If you arrive on scene and they're kind of going at it, let's say verbally, so there's no physical altercation, so you don't have to embed yourself in that. You separate the individuals, right? So you get there and hopefully you have a partner in that situation, and you separate them. They want to be, even if they're talking with you, they want to be aware of the other. And so they will try to position themselves so that they can talk to you while watching them. And in the clinical world, I don't know if you ever work with groups and stuff, they might position themselves in a way that's like that, or maybe you do that on purpose. I don't know. But what we want to do is we want to gain the full attention of the individual that we're speaking with. So if I have, let's say, the male and the other person has the female, we need to position ourselves so that they're forced to not be able to see. It's like, hey, I'm here. Look at me,
right,
and let's talk about this. And so if the other person starts to move or turn, you just turn with them to try to, hey, nope, back here, you're on me, and let's get this down. And so, yeah, it's super important. But however, I mean, I think I just went off on a tangent there, but I think, it's super important, and I think it could be done better. And I don't know if there's a standard that could be set, that could be countrywide, just because culturally in different areas we operate differently. So how you do it in Texas may be different than how you do it in Montana versus how you do it in New Jersey. But there should be an emphasis placed on that, on the non-tools version of communication. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you're right. There are cultural differences depending on where we are. I've seen it, you've seen it. Anybody who's really paying attention has gone anywhere besides where they are right now, has probably seen how, even going to a gas station, you encounter somebody and it's a different feel. And so that part I get, but there are some universals. Like a smile is a smile. Right. And, there's certain universals. I'll tell you one that's pretty universal. And well, I think it might even be actually completely universal. As a therapist, I don't know that all the therapists do this, but for me, one of them is proximity to the exit. I am always aware of proximity to the exit, not just mine. Matter of fact, preferably not mine, theirs. For instance, my couch in my office is set by the door. I do that intentionally. I actually configured my entire office based on the couch needs to be by the door. Because if a client is going to act out for some reason, I want them to have an escape that's easy. Because if they escape, there's less damage, not just physical damage to the office, but damage to, having to go through me. Like, I don't want that setup, but in law enforcement at times, or with EMTs, they may be literally putting themselves in between on purpose because like you said, one, they're trained with the physical stuff. But the other is, if they come at you, that's different than if they go at each other. And usually the observer, or what they are is observers at that point, but they're the participants in the escalation. They are potentially, at least, less likely to go through you than to try to attack the other person. So, yeah, I mean, I think we I don't know. I mean, anecdotally, just on the side, I think it's something worth looking at. I mean, I would love, I don't know that I'm willing to do that research, but I would love to see if somebody has done the research on communication, and particularly the three things that we talked about: the body language, the paraverbals, and the words. Because my understanding is the words are taught pretty routinely.
Mhm.
But then I see something like I've watched the Tyree Nichols video, and I see how their words, they got confused. And I'm like, as a therapist, I'm going, I mean, I understand, but I'm thinking, I'm actually wondering like who was actually in charge on the scene, because they should have been the one barking the instructions, and everybody else should have gone secondary and just repeated the instructions of the first. But that's coming from a chain of command model that I worked from in the
Yeah.
military. And so they're all autonomous in a scenario like that, right? They're using what they think they know and hoping that they're right. And so they change who's in charge routinely in that video. And it does contribute to a fair amount of confusion. I don't know how much it contributes to his death, but it did create communication confusion. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Let me
yeah,
I'll push back just a little bit on that. It's in a situation like that, there should have been only one person communicating and no repeats.
okay.
Only one, because in a situation where someone is being detained or apprehended, whatever you want to call it, uh, the directions should come from one person so that that person can focus on those directions from that individual. And even if the order is repeated exactly, it shifts the focus of the individual to another commander,
Yeah.
I guess. And even if the directions are the same, it still creates confusion, because now you've got two sources of sound coming from two locations, and you don't want to do that. You want it to be clear. It should be one step at a time, and it should be clear from one individual. And
Interesting.
and then a command like get on the ground is too vague.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I'm putting it into context that I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
In a clinical setting, if we were doing, say, like if I was doing co-therapy with another therapist, which I've done many, many times, the co-therapy, because we are in dialogue, I think there's inherently a difference. It's not directive. It's to create and spur and create growth opportunity and spur ideas. And so inherently that's different. But I'm also thinking, even going in, we do establish a little bit. It's not like a clear hierarchy in the sense of the way hierarchy is established in the military, but it's pretty clear that, hey, you're the lead or I'm the lead. And we actually make that known at the very beginning when we are, when whoever's given the instructions to the group. So
Mm-hmm.
if we're giving instruction to the group, it's the one who's giving the initial instructions that technically takes the lead. That doesn't mean they can't hand over the torch, or the torch can't be taken, which is fine because it's dialogue instead of monologues. And so, but at the end, usually the wrap up almost inevitably is going to come from the person who started it. So you got the open and the close, and then the hierarchy. But it's different when you're in a critical situation of a situation like what we were just talking about. So
Mm-hmm.
that's super interesting to me too. I want to, like, just out of curiosity, and I know we're going to jump a little bit to something new. Well, before we do, is there anything you want to add to what we've talked about?
No, that's good. I mean, that's kind of the beginning of the dissertation part. And so that's flavor one. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I do want to, I want to talk about this. I'm going back a tiny bit to go forward in a slightly different way for a moment, just because I want to address it. I think of a situation like in Uvalde, Texas, where a bunch of law enforcement showed up to a shooting at a school and didn't act. Essentially, that's what happened. They didn't act. They waited and waited and waited. There was a massive delay. And
Mhm.
I think about what you said earlier about the focus, and then I repeated it about how it's easier in terms of psychological approach to focus on the negatives and not balance it with some positives. In your research, in terms of decision making, do you think any of that decision making process is, I don't know, delayed at times because of fear of the consequences, as opposed to being able to say, hey, look, we've gotten all of these rewards because we act, and we act in a way that is kind and respectful, but also very firm and in loves in a firm way? Do you think that that imbalance is causing some of these frozen opportunities, or and that is that just me making a reach?
No, I think it is making an impact, and I'm going to be thinking out loud based on what I know of the situation and what I know of the research that I've done, which I wish I had more knowledge of both. Honestly, like I feel pretty versed in all of these, but there's always more to learn. But I think so. Let me see if I can put this as simple as possible. Self-efficacy and of what you're able to do, so what you can do, is fully intertwined with the accountability mechanism. They are inseparable, because if you take action, the action always has some sort of consequences, at least in our environment now. And so part of the rehearsal mechanism that EMTs, law enforcement, and fire go through is if I do this, then this, or
Mhm.
if I don't do this, then this, and how that plays out. And the second this is usually what might happen to me, or what might happen to my unit, or what might happen to the others, whatever that is, and however that plays out. So in a situation like Uvalde, the accountability mechanism dominated the action mechanism in that situation, or at least that's what it appears to be. Because if there's more than a 1 or 2 minute delay, oh, wait, let me back up. From what I understand, they heard shots being fired.
Mhm.
So it's not a 1 or 2 minute delay. If there's more than a 5-second delay, then lives are ending it right now. So how can the accountability mechanism dominate the action mechanism in that case? And that is, it's experiential, not in maybe their own experience and what they went through, let's say. So this is all hypothetical. I'm putting myself in a position that I wasn't in, right? I've been in others, but not this one. Their experience is through the consequences that they've observed by others taking actions, and maybe those actions not going well. And so they didn't want to put themselves, possibly they didn't want to put themselves in a position to where if they acted and it went wrong, now they're going to feel the effects of that, because the accountability from others is going to essentially want some sort of responsibility taken, and that will fall on them, that individual. Yeah. And that's a really, no first responder wants to be in that position. They want to observe a situation and then have the latitude to act as they see fit, because they're the only ones in a position to observe it in that way. No third-party observer sees what they see. It's impossible. And so they have to have that latitude. That latitude comes with a lot of responsibility, a lot of personal responsibility, but also, let me think. It's also, it comes with a heavy weight.
Yeah.
And it's not a weight that you can sit on for days and just, okay, choice A, choice B, choice C. What do you, it's that weight is felt really powerfully, really strong, and you cannot decide. You must act in some way, and you just hope you're right.
Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah, which you addressed in the next part of your dissertation with regard to cause and effect analysis. You went actually into depth, pretty good depth there. I actually really appreciated that part because it overlaps with the social sciences, what I do, the psychology, sociology, and whatnot. But the idea that we're trying to weigh cause and effect without all of the variables. Like you won't ever, it reminds me of you know this about me, but I don't know how much the audience does. When I was in college at first, I was going to be a mathematician. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just be a math teacher. And then, so I was a numbers guy. And then I had this epiphany one day sitting in a statistics class. And I realized the most complicated variable on the planet is the human being. And that's when I went, oh my gosh, if I'm going to study, math, if I'm going to study, real numbers, it has to be in the form of people, and figuring out those puzzle pieces that make people who they are and behaviors what they become. And I've spent since then, I've spent pretty much the rest of my life. I had quickly moved over into the psychology, sociology stuff and went, okay, yeah, no, this is the most complex math problem on the planet for sure. 100%. There's no doubt. I can map animals and I can reasonably predict where they're going. I can map people and there's no way to predict where they're going because there's all these little tiny petri dishes within the big petri dish. And as soon as one of those goes into a new place, all of a sudden the whole petri dish changes. And we see that time and time again. And then in particular, I went down the trauma track because of the way in which it affects the entire mechanism. And so, I study the brain and all of that stuff, which I would love to get into at some point, but I do want to check. What's your timeline? I should have checked before.
I've got a few more minutes, so we're okay.
Okay. I don't want to keep you too long. I would love to hear, you talked about the schemata mental model. And to me, that bridge that I just drew over to the brain science stuff, I would love to know what you learned in that particular area, because I know it closely aligns to the brain research based on what I have seen. And so I would love to just get your take when you talked about the schemata mental model. Give us some insight into what was going on there.
So are you referring to like a little bit further down in the dissertation is that what you're talking about? Or
yeah. So here, let me see if I'll pull it up really real quick on my screen.
I just want to make sure I'm referring to the same thing.
So let me see. I'm on page, looks like 19. On 19, you start talking about NDM, the natural decision making, naturalistic decision making. Is that right?
Correct. Naturalistic decision making.
And then you got into you start overlapping a little bit more with what I do. And so I would like to know from your angle, I'm thinking of it like the three blind people approach an elephant. And I talk about that on my podcast with a fair amount of frequency. And I'm just trying to get the other angles. How did the schemata mental model within, naturalistic decision-making framework, how did that play out? Like, give me your take on it.
Yeah, so that was something I discovered like through the research. I hadn't heard of that. So situational awareness I had heard of, choice making I had heard of, but when it came into, the discovery of the naturalistic decision making, and then what's called the RPD, recognition primed decision model, so this is the whole framework of those models is based on experience and how those experiences get logged in or filed away in the mind, because those become something that all of us, not just first responders, but all of us lean on when it comes to making a decision in a fast-paced environment. So let's just say you're grilling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you're using coal, and the first time, let's say you're 10 years old, the first time you're ever using coal, and you put the lighter fluid on, but you put too much, right? And it flares up. There's an experiential imprint put in your mind. And so you know that that's possible, right? And so then you go through life and you always have that to lean on. And that sort of develops your tendencies. And so that's what naturalistic decision making is like. It's like, okay, firefighter responds to a scene and they see fire in a certain way or a certain pattern and a certain color smoke, and they put all that together, and 6 minutes later the roof collapse, boom, imprint. And then they go through 25 more fires and they see none of that, but they see other things. Then all of a sudden it clicks back, and all of a sudden they see the same combination, and they have firefighters inside trying to make a rescue, right? And so then all of a sudden they see the flames doing the same thing, the colors the same thing, and then they're like, y'all got to get out now. And they're like, we got people inside. And the commander's like, you're getting out now. I understand, but you're getting out now. You have to. And so they get out, and sure enough, the roof collapses again. And he just saved a whole bunch of lives, even at the expense of others that maybe could have gotten out, but they didn't know where they were. So do you spend more lives to try to save more lives? It's like and so that's what naturalistic decision making is like. It's like, how do you imprint the most things possible so that you can lean on those and recognize those in times of stress?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. What you're describing, actually, I wasn't thinking about doing this, but I pulled something up real quick, and I want to run you through it, because I don't know. I mean, it sounds similar, but I want your thoughts. I put together a presentation, gosh, maybe 10 years ago now, on memory specifically, because I was doing some brain research, and you're talking about my frame of reference is scaffolding. So I'm going to go ahead and try to pull this up and see what happens. We'll see. For those of you who are watching, you might be able to see this on Rumble or YouTube. And I'm going to share a screen with you, and hopefully this will work. So can you see that, Jason?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you've got, I don't know if I can hit play and it'll still go or not, but let's try it. All right. Can you see that? Is that big on your screen?
It is.
Oh, sweet. We'll see how that turns out, because this is a new one for me. So, what is a memory? I did this as a group. So Daniel Siegel, Dr. Siegel, who's, he's one of the people I read almost all of his books. He's incredibly good at phrasing things so that I can understand them. So he dumbs it down for me. He suggests memory is a combination of a biological response and a cognitive process. It's an experience dependent process. That's what I heard you saying. Is that?
Yeah, essentially. Yep.
So then he goes on and defines it as the way past events affect future function. Okay, so then we talk about types of memory. There's two types of memory. There's implicit memory, a form of memory that doesn't have an internal experience. So it's like a photo. And then there's explicit memory, which is like a video. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so in a situation like this, and I could get into the brain stuff, but I don't want to bore you to death. In a situation like this, what you're saying is the providers, they have to be scaffolding old memories in video form, because they have to be able to adjust to nuances all the time.
Yes.
And because it's the cause and the effect. If they were dependent on implicit memories, I would suggest that they would be less effective, because they go back to that snapshot, and so they can't play it out in their mind, and so they're really running around collecting explicit memories.
Or they should be. Yes, because implicit memory is like a classroom setting where they're telling you what you should do in a situation. Explicit memory is you either doing it in training or in real life, where you're actually feeling those the sensory overload.
Yeah, exactly. So that to me is a super, I mean, honestly, I could totally geek out on this. The scaffolding process, the way I describe it here, I'm going to get out of this too, because the way I describe the scaffolding process is, you have a set of glasses. I literally will pull out my blue blockers that I use when I'm on the screen too much, and I stick them on, and I say, okay, I can see, but it's tinted slightly. Well, what happens if my glasses that I put on my face are tinted with not just a color issue, but a vision issue, meaning they have somebody else's prescription? Now all of a sudden the whole world looks different. Does it make it clearer, or does it make it blurry? Does it make it, make more sense or less sense? And so, when I talk about scaffolding, I talk about, you put the glasses on, but then sometimes we leave them on and we take another set of glasses and put them over the top, and another and put them over the top, and another and put them over the top. And by the time it's all said and done, we got 10 pairs of glasses, and our view of the world comes through the initial lens first, right? The idea that first paradigm, the engram, that first memory. And so it takes time when I talk about undoing the scaffolding so that we can really truly learn. It's a process of undoing the scaffolding and tracing it back to that initial memory where, you maybe somebody goes into law enforcement because they saw mom and dad in a fight, the cops came and saved the day. And so they have this sort of, and not all law enforcement does this, but some probably get into it for reasons like that. And they have in their way back memory, the idea that they can be a hero, which is great in one way and awful in another, because if we think we can be a hero in a chaotic situation, inevitably we're going to find out we can't, that there's going to be a situation that dominates us versus we can come in and, ride in and save the day. And so those kinds of realities hit and cause significant issues, because cause and effect, we applied cause and effect to an early memory. And then in the later years, cause and effect didn't work the same way because we were in a different role. We were in that, director role or the provider role, and not the observer role.
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect segue into something else, and we can maybe close with this. But if you pull up my model that I put, I think it's on page 44.
All right.
And see if you can show that.
I know what you're talking about. Here, let me get to it real quick. All right. So give us a moment, folks. I'm not trying to bore you to death, but also want to make sure we do it right. I'm going to share. There you go. And 44, you said? So people can see me. If you're with me, you can see me scrolling really, really fast. That's not it. I know which one you're talking about. 44.
Nope,
Okay.
keep going. That's efficacy. Yep, almost. Should be right. Nope, 45, I guess. There you go.
All right.
Okay.
There you go.
So this is
Go ahead.
This is the conceptual model. So the scaffolding thing that you were discussing fits perfectly with this, which prevents what you're saying from occurring, because this is also a scaffolding, because it starts with how on the bottom left, and then it's a continuous cycle. So just follow the blue line, and you collect information, situate, do, and then you collect, situate, do. And so this can happen like during an event, or it can happen over years and years of gaining experience. So that very first image that you have where you think you can be a hero, because you've collected some information, you've situated yourself within that, either hypothetically or real, and then you did something or envisioned yourself doing something, right? It starts with that. And then you become a cop, or you become an EMT, or become a firefighter. Then you experience it for real over and over again. And you start developing this model where you go around, you collect, situate, do, collect, situate, do, and you do it in various situations over and over again. You can actually eliminate that first part where you just think you can be something, and you start to realize what you can actually do, because you might be really good at some stuff and not good at other things that you thought you might be good at, because you're actually doing it over and over again. And that's where the training mechanism kicks in, because you can, after 2 or 3 years, you're better. And then 3 or 4 years later, you're even better. And then you become a supervisor and you start training your people to become better and better at this cycle. So this is event to event, and over time in your own development as a provider and as a leader. And so you can erase those older memories, because hey, I thought I could do this. I really can't do that, but I am really good at this. And so then you get yourself in a situation where, you get called to something and you're like, I got this one. I'm good. I know I'm good at this. And there's another situation I'm not as good at, but that, and you don't have to lean on that first lens that you were talking about, because you've removed it. And now you're looking through the lenses that are real and that really help you. So
this plays into something like, when we're dealing with something like a hero complex, right? Somebody who just wants to be the hero. There's often, you're talking in this model about the limitations we learn we have. We have strengths, we have limitations. I get that now, but when you have somebody who doesn't accurately assess their strengths and limitations because of blind spots, right? Sometimes people put on that lens and they can't look through it another way. They refuse to, right? And so it requires then that leadership accountability in the middle say, we're going to insert ourselves here, because but they can only do that after the fact.
Yes. But hopefully that fact is in training, not in something real, because as a Marine, and you'll know this, when you do training over and over again, you can tell who's got it and who doesn't in those situations. So you don't have to worry about them in a real situation, because you wouldn't put them in that situation if you can help it.
No, that makes sense to me, except I'm going to push back a tiny bit.
Sure.
Because I remember in basic training, I think we all had them. Do you want me to take this off the screen, or do you want me to leave it up?
No, you're fine. I mean, unless you need to refer to it.
No. Okay. So there was this recruit, and oh my gosh, he was like the platoon turd. His motivation to do well was fine. His desire was there. He just could not do it. I remember many times we were looking for his socks. He just couldn't figure his crap out. Ran into him about a year later, and he was a grunt. And in a year from basic, he had promoted to a corporal, which is stupid fast. Like that is, if you're coming out of basic, a private, because he was like the platoon turd, and you pick up corporal within basically right around a year and a half, something like that. And I'm going, how in the world? And he looked at me in the eyes and he said, man, I don't know what happened in basic training, but I just could not organize my thoughts. But once I got out into the fleet, after about 30 days, it just started clicking. And so he was not what we thought he was in training.
Mhm.
Like he wasn't even like, how did dude survived? I remember, going up a Mount Mother Effer,
Mhm.
and he's for those of you who don't know, that's in Camp Pendleton, and it's this endless hill basically. And every plateau, like he was in the back. They put him back there on purpose. They were trying to break him because they were tired of him not figuring it out. And they were like, well, let's just get him to quit and then reset him, and then we'll be good. But so they had him in the back, and they would call him, and then he would have to run and catch up, and then they'd call him. And so he probably did Mount Mother Effer twice while we all did it once. And that's not an exaggeration. Like they were trying to get him to say I quit. And he didn't. Right. So maybe in part that contributed, but we all thought like, good luck. I wish you well. And I hope to never be in combat with you. To, a year and a half later, he figured it out. So sometimes training is different than the real thing. How do you account for that?
Yeah. So he was still in a training mode. He did figure it out through training. So even if it was, you go through basic, which is a total unique form of training where everyone breaks and everyone's a turd, right? To MCT, which is you might still be a turd, but you smell slightly better, right? That's about it. And then you get into a unit, and now you're still training. So you start removing some of the restrictions from boot camp, let's say, to MCT, and then from MCT to your unit, you start removing those, and that starts freeing up mental capacity to actually engage with the knowledge that you've developed, which was always there. It just didn't come out. So that's how I account for that is you've got to backpedal. You got to take off some of those things that are engaging those cognitive functions that are preventing this individual from realizing their own potential. And that's part of training too. You've got to do that. You've got to put all the stress on, and then you've got to pull some back, and then add it, and then pull it back, because they have to learn to develop within that environment. Does that make sense? And so it was overwhelming him at first. And then maybe over time, he figured out how to deal with that, because he had that Zoom effect, in, out, and was able to sort of deal with it.
Yeah. No, it makes me think about, we have a capacity, like a working memory capacity. We have a long-term memory capacity and a short-term memory capacity, and I think, we look at people like servers in restaurants who come by and they don't carry any pen or any paper or anything. And they take an order for a table of 8 and they get it all right. And it's like, how in the world do they do that? It's because what they have done is they have, really honed the skill of short-term memory capacity. They hold it for the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They get to the screen, pop, 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 and then they totally forget it until they come back to the table with it. So that they've got it in the short-term memory. They keep it on recall just long enough to get to the food to the table. And really, most of them, my understanding is they start with 1 as their starting point, and that's how they remember it. Like they put it in rooms of their house. It's that short-term memory.
Yeah, there's a lot of skills that go into that. But once you get further in my dissertation, you'll get into that as well.
No, I've been looking at
it.
it.
Okay, cool.
I'm already there, but I don't want to dig into it today.
No, it's long.
Yeah, I know. But it's a good segue for something that we can dig into the next time that we meet. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, cool.
Anyway, awesome. I'm super glad you joined me. Hopefully the recording went well. Now is the time to find out. If nothing else, the video will record, and we will go ahead and post that potentially. And I'm going to go ahead and log us off here. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. You're gonna know how to connect if you want to connect with me. Potentially get you connected with my brother if there's a question you have for him. I'm happy to forward them on, and we'll see you next time.